The first time Kayla tried to open the kennel door, he did not growl, he stared. A deep, unblinking stare like he had already sized her up and decided she was not worth the energy. His name tag said Rex, but the volunteers called him the statue. No one walked him anymore. No one tried. That morning, the shelter's back hallway was soaked in mop water and the stink of bleach. Kayla's sneakers squeaked with every step. She had not wanted this community service gig, and she definitely did not want him. But the shelter manager shoved a worn leather leash into her hand and muttered something about trust exercises. She reached for the latch. He did not move. But the moment the metal clicked, his ears twitched. When she stepped back, he stood, not lunging, not pacing, just standing tall like he remembered a command no one had said. The leash felt heavier than it should have. By the time they got outside, he was walking half a step ahead of her like he knew the route already. No sniffing, no tugging, just watching. When a man passed by too close on the sidewalk, Rex shifted his body between them, slow and intentional. It was not instinct, it was training, and she never said a word.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
The shelter did not smell like dogs, not really. It smelled like cold metal and soggy kibble and something sour underneath that made Kayla gag the first time she entered. Her foster mom had called it a good place to learn some responsibility. But Kayla knew what it really was: cheap labor, a place to dump the foster kid who talked back too much. The volunteer coordinator barely looked up when Kayla signed in. He just waved toward the kennels and told her to start with the back rows. That was where they kept the ones nobody wanted. The lifers, dogs with numbers instead of names. She passed pit mixes with eyes full of fire and old shepherds who did not bother to bark anymore. But one kennel stopped her short. He sat perfectly still in the far corner. No pacing, no whining. Just staring through the bars like he had seen every person who ever walked by and judged each one silently. His coat was dark sable, almost black in the shadows, and the sign above his cage just said Rex, not adoptable. Do not open alone. Great, she thought. That is the one they are going to make me walk. The leash was already hanging from a hook beside his kennel. Thick leather, scarred at the loop. Looked like it had been through war. Maybe it had. Kayla hesitated at the latch. She had walked dogs before. Back in her first foster placement, they had a lazy hound named Toast who only got up for bacon grease. But this was different. Rex did not look sleepy. He looked alert. Waiting, her hand trembled as she snapped the latch free. No growl, no bark. Just a shift in posture, ears forward, muscles tightening like a spring being coiled. She slipped inside and looped the leash over the metal collar already buckled around his neck. The metal was warm. He had been waiting. Outside, the sun burned off the smell of bleach. Kayla kept her eyes forward as they walked the narrow shelter path, ignoring the side glances from staff and volunteers. Rex stayed beside her without pulling once. Every few steps, he looked up not at her, but around her, always scanning. Like he was watching for something she could not see. They passed a chain-link fence where another volunteer was hosing out a kennel. The spray hissed across concrete. Rex's ears twitched. His pace shifted just a hair faster. Kayla tightened her grip on the leash. When a man rounded the corner near the gate, just a normal guy in work boots, Rex stepped sideways, planted his body between the man and Kayla, not snarling, not aggressive, just blocking. The man blinked. Whoa, sorry. Kayla's throat tightened. She had not said a word, had not given a signal, but Rex had moved anyway, on instinct, or something deeper. They made it back without incident. She clipped him back in, replaced the leash, and turned to leave. But before she walked away, she looked back. Rex had not gone to his corner. He was staring at the leash. Kayla was not supposed to come back the next day. Her schedule was 3 shifts a week, but she asked the foster mom for a ride and showed up anyway. Nobody questioned it. The shelter was always short-staffed. When she passed the front desk, she glanced at the whiteboard where updates were scribbled. A new dog had come in overnight, a bite case. The board just said red tag, youth eval pending, next to the name Princess. Kayla did not ask questions. She headed straight to the back row. Rex was already sitting at the gate. This time, when she unlatched the kennel, he stepped forward on his own, not fast, not aggressive like he knew. She looped the leash. They walked again. Same pattern, straight spine, careful gait, watching everything. But this time, when they passed the chain-link gate again, he stopped. Dead stop, ears locked forward. Kayla followed his gaze. At the far edge of the fence, behind a sagging shed door, something moved. A shape, human, not shelter staff. She blinked, but it was gone. Rex growled, low, controlled, not angry, focused. Kayla's chest tightened. She gripped the leash tighter and kept walking, but she could feel his body tense beside her for the rest of the loop. By the fifth walk, he knew her. Not just her routine, her mood. The way her fingers curled tighter when she was about to cry. The way her voice flattened when someone called her by her full name. Kayla did not talk much, not to him, not to the staff, but Rex responded anyway. When her shoulders hunched, he stepped closer. When she smiled, his tail flicked once. When she laughed, just once. When he kicked mulch in a perfect circle before laying down, he licked her hand. That was the first time she touched his fur without fear. It was coarse, warm, real. The sixth walk changed everything. It started normal, early morning fog, empty shelter lot, same leash, same route. But when they reached the far edge of the yard, Rex froze, every muscle locked, ears tight, nose flared. Then he growled. This time it was not low and controlled, it was sharp, a warning. Kayla followed his eyes. Behind the fence, near the dumpsters, a figure was crouching low. Up, back turned, then gone, darted into the alley. Kayla's heart pounded. She tugged the leash. Rex did not move. He was waiting for a command, waiting like someone used to give him orders. She stared at him, at the perfect stillness of his body, at the way his eyes flicked from her to the alley and back. She whispered the word without thinking. Go, and Rex ran. He did not hesitate. The moment the word left her mouth, Rex was gone, his paws cutting through gravel, leash trailing like a shadow. Kayla barely processed the blur of muscle and motion before he disappeared past the dumpster. She ran, not fast enough. Her lungs burned and her sneakers slapped wet pavement. The alley behind the shelter was narrow and dark even in daylight. It smelled like rotten copper. The last thing she saw before turning the corner was the figure, the hoodie, the glint of something metallic, and Rex, low, fast, controlled. By the time she caught up, the man was on the ground. He was not hurt, just scared. Rex had not touched him, just pinned him muscle against chest, one paw pressed against the man's collarbone, growling, low, constant. Like a pressure valve barely holding, the man's eyes were wide. I was just looking for food. I ain't stealing, I ain't. Kayla reached for the leash. Her hands shook. She whispered again. Back. Rex froze. Then slowly he stepped off. Not all the way, just enough. The man scrambled backward, muttering, slipping on his own panic. He bolted. No one chased him. Rex sat down. Kayla dropped to her knees. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. Not because she was brave, because she was shaking and had nowhere else to put the fear. Rex did not move. He just watched the alley like a sentry. The shelter director called her in that afternoon. I heard you disobeyed a safety order, he said flatly. That dog is not supposed to be off-leash. Kayla opened her mouth to argue, but the words stuck. He stopped a break-in, she finally said. He pinned a man, the director snapped. You do not know his triggers. You do not have authority. But he waited, she said. He waited for me to say something. That silenced him. He glanced at the paperwork on his desk. Shift logs, old behavior notes, intake records. That dog came from the city unit, K9 division. They dumped him after a bite complaint, said he could not adjust to civilian adoption. Kayla frowned. So he was trained, the director shrugged. I assume so. They do not send us the full file, just the release papers and warnings. He has not responded to any commands from staff, won't even sit. Kayla looked down at her hands. He responded to me, the man sighed. Walk him if you want, but do not take him out of sight again. She nodded. He paused, then added, you might be the only reason he is still breathing next week. She started staying later, after the other kids from community service left, after the hounds stopped barking and the staff flicked off the break room lights. She sat beside Rex's kennel on a bucket turned sideways and just watched him breathe. One night she brought a flashlight and a notebook. She looked up old police K9 command lists online. Most dogs were trained in German or Dutch. Short commands, harsh syllables. She whispered them through the bars. Platz, nothing. Higher. Rex tilted his head. She tried again. Sits. He stood. Her breath caught. She flipped the page. New list. Old lapped archive. Fuss. Rex stepped toward the bars and sat again. She swallowed, then whispered, Revieren. He turned toward the door, not fast, but certain. He was trained. Some part of him was still working from a handbook no one had access to anymore, but he had waited for someone to speak his language. At school, Kayla barely paid attention. The worksheets, the cafeteria fights, the slumped-over counselor with the big earrings who asked if she had considered journaling. It all felt too far away, too small. She had Rex now, someone who listened without speaking, someone who did not flinch when she flinched. That weekend, her foster mom asked why she was volunteering so much. Because the dog remembers who he was, she answered. Her foster mom rolled her eyes and walked away, but Rex understood. Monday morning, the power went out in the shelter. Some breaker blew during the storm. No lights, no cameras, no staff for the first hour. Kayla was the first one there. The kennels were quiet, too quiet. When she reached Rex's row, he was pacing, silent, controlled, focused. He stared at the wall across from his kennel. She followed his eyes. The door to the records room was cracked. Kayla frowned. She had never seen it open before. Volunteers were not allowed in. That was where they kept intake files, medical charts, bite reports. She looked at Rex. He sat waiting. She opened the door. The room smelled like mildew and toner. Dust coated everything. She flicked on her flashlight. Folders, stacks, labels yellowing with time. She found his file by accident, under a box labeled Unfit Adoptions. Rex, K94582. Breed, Belgian Malinois Handler, DET. Michael Sanders, KIA. Date removed, 12 March, 2 years ago. Behavior, refuses reassignment. Unresponsive, signs of depression. Last command, refused to leave scene of incident. Disposition, shelter placement, pending evaluation. Kayla's heart dropped. He had watched his partner die, refused to leave him. They punished him for that. She walked out of the records room shaking. Rex was standing, waiting. She knelt and pressed her forehead to the kennel bars. "I am so sorry," she whispered. Rex leaned forward, pressing his head to the bars too. No sound. Just shared silence. That night she went home and could not sleep. Her foster house was loud. A baby crying, a TV on, someone shouting behind a closed door. She sat on the porch steps in the cold and stared at the leash she had started bringing home in her backpack. It still smelled like metal and pine mulch and Rex. She whispered the words again, fuss, sits, reviren. Then she closed her eyes and said the one word she had not tried yet. Search. She opened them slowly. The world looked the same, but something inside her shifted. The next day she brought a tennis ball to the shelter, not for play, for a test. She stood in the field behind the shelter, fenced, empty, and gave a single command. Such. Rex's ears perked. She threw the ball into the weeds. He ran, straight path, fast, nose low, tail up. He returned 30 seconds later, ball in mouth, dropped it at her feet, sat, looked at her. Like he was saying, now you. The morning came in dull and heavy, a gray lid pressed over the shelter yard, and the city hum flattened under damp air. Chain link whispered when the breeze pushed it, and puddles held thin skins of oil that swirled when a sparrow dipped to drink. Kayla stood at the gate with the old leather leash looped twice around her wrist, and Rex watched the field with a stillness that felt like prayer. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and the mulch near the agility tunnel smelled like pine and rust. She felt the cold through the soles of her shoes and let it anchor her before they stepped out. She started with what had worked before, because success made a map she could follow. Fuss brought Rex to her side with a precise little lane that said he belonged right there, 1/2 step at her knee. Sits landed him on his haunches with a neat tuck that looked like folded steel. Hirer drew a tight turn that ended in a direct gaze, as if his attention could be held like a coin in her palm. She tested the distance and the timing and noted how his ears shifted when she breathed deeper. She tried revirin along the fence so he would sweep the perimeter, and he took it like a memory, moving with a steady trot that skimmed the line without touching it. The big dogs in the next row crashed against the bars in noisy frustration, but Rex did not flinch or quicken, and that calm cut through the clamor like a clean blade. Kayla walked with him and counted steps, then stopped in the far corner where weeds laced the chain link with brittle brown thread. She tossed the tennis ball into the brush and waited. Such sent him forward, and he returned fast, dropped the ball at her shoes, then lifted his eyes as if to say that the task was simple and the world was not. She eased the work toward the center of the yard, away from fences and eyes. The clouds thinned to a pale sheet, and a light bled through that turned every wet surface into dull silver. She gave plats and got nothing, which matched the first time she had tried it, so she logged that too. She tried stay, and he rose into a still stance with paws planted and chest lifted like a statue on a quiet square. She felt a prickle then, because every precise motion showed the ghost of a past handler, and that ghost stood closer now than it had yesterday. The kennel tech moved across the yard with a mop bucket that sloshed blue water, and Kayla saw Rex track him for a beat, then shift back. She kept her voice low and her movements clean because messy trainers made messy dogs, and messy was not safe. She threw the ball again, longer this time, and let the silence stretch. Rex went, cut through wet grass, and returned so fast the water still scattered from his shoulders when he sat. She took a breath and tried a word she had not used yet. Oz was supposed to be a release and a giving up of whatever the mouth held, so it seemed harmless with a ball and a calm yard and a dog who trusted her. The ball dropped from his teeth at once, but his eyes did not come back to her like before. They moved past her, past the gate, past the field itself, as if the chain link was not real and the world outside had opened along an old tier. He went rigid in a way that made the air feel sharper. His tail lowered until it was a line. His ears pinned and then trembled. A whine pressed up from his chest and died in the space between one breath and the next, and that silence rang like a struck bell. Took 3 steps toward the far edge of the yard and stopped as if he had hit an invisible wall and could not cross it again. She followed and saw that he was not looking at anything now. He was looking at a place that used to hold a street and red light and the stink of hot brake pads. In that place a man had fallen. In that place a partner had stopped breathing. He had refused to leave. She knew this not because anyone told her, but because his body said it with a clarity that words could not carry. Kayla knelt in the wet and set her palm on his shoulder where the muscle quivered like a wire under tension. She did not speak. Commands cut and silence could sometimes stitch. She let the seconds pass and matched her breathing to his, slow and steady and grounded by the smell of wet earth and bleach and old leather. When the tremor eased, she placed the ball in his mouth again and stepped backward 2 paces to break the shape of the moment. He came out of it like a diver breaches and drags a lungful of air. His eyes flicked to her face. A small tail beat thumped once against her shin. The ball sat soft between his teeth. She gave fuss and watched him gather himself into the shape that meant together. She gave higher and got that tight turn and the brief touch of his shoulder to her knee that warmed her more than the thin light ever could. She did not say O's again, not that day. She changed the task and let him track a glove she had rubbed along the fence posts. Such sent him forward, and his nose worked in a quick flutter that looked like curiosity instead of panic, and that difference mattered more than the result. He found the glove under a low bench and placed it in her hand, and sat with a little sigh that she had never heard before. She felt it as a small gift he was willing to share. The shelter settled around them in a rhythm that she had started to trust. Buckets knocked against floors, latches clicked, fans hummed as power surged and wavered. Somewhere up front, a puppy cried with a high, thin sound that braided with the squeak of a cart and made a rough song. Kayla thought about the file in the records room and the line that said he had refused to leave the scene, and she wondered what word had pinned him there. Maybe it had been O's, not as a release, but as the last command a partner gave before the world fell apart. She dried Rex with a rough towel in the run and felt his heat against her fingers. He leaned into the cloth in a way that felt less like tolerance and more like trust, and that shift pulled at something deep in her chest. She remembered the nights when she slept with her shoes on because moving houses often taught you that leaving could come without warning. She remembered the way voices could turn hard without rising and how doors could teach you to be small. She thought of all the commands she had learned from people who did not care where those words landed. In the afternoon, the sky gave up and rained hard. Water ran in sheets off the roof and drummed on the dumpsters like a fast hand. The back hallway flooded in a shallow film that reflected the long ceiling lights and made the world look like it was split by a thin river of glass. Kayla mopped without being told and watched Rex watch her from his run with a focus that felt like a bridge across a chasm. He did not pace. He did not bark. He looked like he was counting the swipes of the mop and filing the rhythm away. The director walked past with a clipboard and did not stop, and the text spoke in low, tired voices that kept the day moving while the storm did the same. Kayla finished the floor and propped the door for air, then checked the latches twice, because caution was a habit that had saved her more than once. She returned to Rex and slid down the wall into a crouch, level with his eyes. For a long minute, she did nothing and let him do nothing, and the shared pause felt like the kind of training most people skip. When the rain eased, the air left a clean, cold taste behind. She took Rex out again for a last loop before closing, and the yard glistened like a mirror cracked into 1,000 pieces. She moved slow so the footing would not trick them, and he moved like he had decided that careful was a team sport. At the far corner, he stopped on his own and lifted his nose, and she felt the shift through the leash like a faint electric hum. She followed his focus and saw the gate at the service alley move a fraction against its chain. It could have been wind, but the rain had stilled the trees. It could have been a loosened hinge, but the motion had a pulse. She remembered the figure from days before and the stash of kibble near the broken board. Rex stood at full height now, and his body drew a clean line between the gate and her toes. She slid one hand down the leash and gave stay so he would hold that line. His ears tracked the metal rattle with sharp little twitches. Water dripped in steady beats from the edge of the roof and ticked against the trash can lids. Kayla let her breath slow and kept her eyes on the hinge because fear could multiply if fed, and she had learned to starve it when she could. She reached for the side latch to check the slack and felt wet leather bite into her fingers. Rex shifted toward the gate by an inch, then another inch, and she made her hand steady so he would not think she doubted him. There was a scrape at the far side that sounded like a shoe on concrete. The chain jerked once like a heartbeat. The noise went still in a way that felt planned. She chose her next word with care because words could open doors and close them, and sometimes they made the ground drop away. Watch would fix his eyes. Heel would anchor his body. Hold would ask for patience while the world tested theirs. She started to shape the sound in her mouth. The chain went taut and snapped hard against metal. The leash ring in her hand jerked so fast it burned her palm. The gate yawned a thin dark line, and cold air knifed through it as Rex surged to meet the opening and the world on the other side. The leather bit down as a single sharp crack rang across the yard like a warning siren, and the leash began to slip. The sound still rang in her ears, sharp and metallic, when the gate pushed wider. The service chain swung in a loose arc, and the hinge screamed with a dry cry that echoed against the wet walls. Rex surged forward, body like a drawn bowstring, and the leash seared across Kayla's palm. She tightened her grip out of reflex, but the jolt yanked her off balance, and her knee hit the slick ground with a thud that shot pain up her thigh. The alley beyond the fence was dark even in late afternoon. The storm had left pools that glistened like broken glass, and one of those pools rippled as a boot splashed through. A shadow shifted back, half hidden in the skeletal frame of the dumpsters. Rex barked once, a thunderclap of sound that filled the yard. Not frenzied, not wild, commanded. Kayla forced her weight against the leash, felt her shoulder wrench, and shouted the first word that came into her throat. Stay. Rex froze in perfect form, paws braced, chest tall, head locked on the gap. He did not move, but every line of him trembled with readiness. The chain at the gate trembled too, like someone's grip faltered on the far side. Kayla's breath clouded in the cooling air, her heartbeat pounding so hard that her ribs hurt with each slam. The shadow shifted again, then as if testing her courage, the figure leaned forward enough for her to glimpse a pale chin under the hood. Just a flash of skin, just enough to prove it was real. Then gone. The gate snapped back with a rattle and slammed shut. Rex held his stance until the silence settled, and only when Kayla whispered, "Fuss," did he drop back to her side. His flank pressed into her knee, steady and firm, as though anchoring her in place. She realized then that her whole body was shaking. Back inside, the staff brushed it off. The tech at the front desk shrugged when she tried to explain. Homeless guys cut through the alley all the time. They spook easy. Just do not let the dog off leash and you will be fine. Fine, the words scraped her like sandpaper, because nothing about the way Rex had moved was fine. He had not barked for nothing. He had known. He had responded with the certainty of training, not instinct. That night she sat on her foster bed with the old leash across her lap. She ran her fingers over the cracks in the leather and thought about the file in the records room. Thought about the words, refused to leave scene of incident. Thought about the way his ears had twitched at O's, the way his body had locked at some memory invisible to her. She whispered words into the dark just to feel their shapes. Fuss, Hyra, Reveran, each one like a key trying to fit a lock. She did not know which lock or which door or what waited on the other side. The rain tapped the window until sleep pulled her under. By the next shift, the staff had forgotten about the gate incident. Kayla had not. She started to carry a small notebook, scribbling down every reaction Rex gave to each command. How his ears flicked, how his paws planted, how long he held. The list grew like a secret map. One afternoon she tried shuts, an old word she had seen in a police manual. Rex's body stiffened and his chest rumbled, not toward her, toward the janitor who had just stepped into the hallway with a cart full of bleach bottles. Kayla's stomach dropped. She whispered, "Fuss, quick," and Rex returned to her side with mechanical precision. The janitor never even noticed. That night she circled the word in her notebook 3 times. He had been trained for protection, not play, not home. Battle. The next week the shelter held an adoption event. Kayla had not planned to be there on her day off, but her foster mom dragged her along, claiming it would look good on reports. The front yard was packed with folding tables, leashes, and bright signs with glitter that clung to the air. Puppies yipped in playpens, while volunteers wore matching shirts and forced cheerful smiles. No one took Rex outside. Kayla saw him through the bars of his kennel, sitting in the corner as the crowd swirled past. A toddler pressed sticky fingers against the glass, and Rex only blinked once, unmoved. Families passed him without pause, voices high with excitement as they pointed to wagging tails and floppy ears elsewhere. Kayla sat on the floor beside his kennel, knees tucked, arms crossed. "They do not know," she whispered, though she had sworn to herself she would not speak aloud. "They do not see." His head tilted, just a fraction, but enough. By the end of the day, every puppy had an adoption slip. Every young shepherd mix was gone. The staff high-fived each other, talking about numbers and success. Rex remained, alone. Kayla walked home with the leash coiled in her pocket and her notebook pressed against her chest. 2 nights later, the shelter alarm tripped. Kayla found out in the morning when the staff whispered about it in the break room. Someone had broken into the supply shed out back. Bags of food slashed open, cans missing, blankets tossed. They said it was probably just scavengers, probably nothing serious. But when Kayla reached Rex's kennel, he was already standing at the gate. Ears forward, posture tight, not restless, alert. She crouched low and whispered, "What did you see?" He licked once at the corner of his mouth, then sat, waiting. That evening she stayed after again. The storm clouds were gone, replaced by a sharp cold that turned every surface hard and brittle. She took Rex into the yard, let him pace the perimeter. Every time they neared the service gate, his head snapped toward it. Each time she gave a command, Platz, stay, fuss to redirect. But the pull remained, a quiet magnet tugging at both of them. Finally she stopped fighting it. Such. Rex bolted to the gate, nose to the chain, breathing sharp, fast, driven. He circled once, then twice, then stopped and pressed his nose to a spot near the base of the fence. Kayla crouched beside him. The soil was disturbed, not storm runoff, not wind, a footprint, small. Human, her pulse climbed fast. She set her palm against Rex's neck and whispered, "Good boy." For the first time since she had known him, his tail wagged, not fast, just one clean sweep. When she went home that night, the foster mom scolded her for being late. The baby screamed in the kitchen and the TV drowned it out with a laugh track. Kayla slipped past it all to her room and pulled out the notebook. She wrote one line at the top of the page, "They are coming back." She did not know who they were. But Rex knew, and she trusted Rex more than she trusted anyone. The following morning, she was back at the shelter before sunrise. The lot was empty, shadows stretching long across cracked pavement. The gate hung crooked, chain loose. Her throat tightened when she saw it. Someone had tried again. She turned to Rex. His ears were already locked on the gap, his body drawn tall and ready. Kayla wrapped the leash around her fist and whispered the word that had started all of this. "Go." He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, not rushing, not breaking. Each paw landed silent. Each breath came sharp. And as he drew closer to the gate, Kayla realized something that chilled her blood. Rex was not just reacting, he was remembering, because someone on the other side had trained him once. And someone on the other side was waiting. The chain rattled. The gap widened. Kayla tightened her grip until her knuckles burned. Rex lowered his head. And then the darkness moved. The alley exhaled a breath of cold as dawn peeled a thin gray strip along the horizon, and the yard held the smell of wet metal and pine mulch after a night of wind that had rattled every latch. The chain at the service gate quivered like a tuning wire, and puddles in the cracked concrete reflected a ceiling of rolling cloud that looked heavy enough to fall. Kayla stood with the leash looped twice around her wrist and felt the damp bite her skin, while the back of her neck prickled with that old warning that meant do not blink. Rex stood tall at her knee and watched the crack of darkness at the gate with a kind of fierce stillness that fit him like his coat, and the world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of them and a thin line of light. The air was silent, except for a drip from the gutter that marked time with a slow, uneven clock. The gap shifted, and a shadow leaned through, and the dark shape carried weight that spoke of hunger and a choice made in a corner with no door. Kayla felt the leash tighten and gave the word stay to hold him steady, and the power in his body pressed against her leg like a silent engine that waited for a key. The shape froze when Rex barked once with that deep controlled thunder that said not a step more, and the echo rolled under the roof and along the fence like a wave that had found stone. The hood lifted enough to show the pale edge of a cheek, the glint of a metal loop, and a hand that shook just enough to betray fear that had not learned how to hide. Then the figure shifted, as if to test how close it could come before the storm broke. Kayla tasted copper on her tongue and spoke the word watch low and even, and felt Rex lock his eyes to the intruder with a calm that was more warning than threat. The scent drifted across the gap, and it was not booze or smoke. It was old food and cold fabric and rain, and that truth cut the shape of the moment into something more complicated than danger. The figure murmured in a thin voice that did not rise, and although she could not hear the words, she could read the plea in the angle of shoulders and the set of hands and the way a gaze would not meet hers, and the world that had taught her to see small details sharpened without asking her permission. She kept her voice low and asked for heel, and Rex slid back that half step to give the space a boundary that was clear and not cruel, and then she gave hold so he would anchor while she crouched and slid a bag of food through the gap without stepping toward it. The figure reached with a twitchy lift of fingers, snagged the bag, and vanished in a ripple that left the chain shivering and the gate clicking back to its crooked rest. The silence that followed had weight, and Rex's breath broke it in careful tides that matched Kayla's without effort. She pressed her palm to his neck and felt the heat and the tiny tremor that meant ready and not afraid, and she knew in a clean flash that every command he had learned had once been taught by a voice that loved him. The wind curled across the yard and carried a thin sound from the alley that could have been thanks and could have been nothing, and she chose to let it be both so the place would remain honest. She rose and brushed grit from her knees, and she led Rex in a slow arc out to the field so they could shake the moment loose from their muscles before it turned into a shadow that would follow them. The grass held beads of water like 1,000 little eyes, and the sky brightened one shade. She threw the tennis ball and sent him with such, and he flew in a clean line that cut the soft ground as if he had traced the path in chalk. Then he returned and sat with the ball soft between his teeth and looked up at her like he always did when he wanted her to be brave. The word O's had haunted the yard the day she tried it, so she waited and touched his chest and breathed until his jaw softened on its own and the ball eased into her palm, and the choice mattered more than the command. She lined him up along the fence and walked him through reverin, and then fuss, and then stay, and each task stitched his focus back into the present until the yard was only the yard again. When she finally set the leash, he leaned his shoulder into her knee in a way that felt like a shared oath that neither of them needed to speak. The morning settled on them like a warm hand. By noon, the shelter buzzed with that busy, tired energy that comes with a new week, and Kayla carried her notebook like a passport as she moved from kennel to kennel until it was time to ask for what she wanted more than anything she had ever wanted. The director listened with that long blank face he used when he did not want to show his hand, but his eyes kept sliding to the page where she had logged command and response and duration like the data could make everything simple. She asked for a structured foster plan with training oversight, and she named the list that a system would need to hear, things like weekly classes and a muzzle in public, and a pledge to keep him working his brain so he would not build pressure. And she said the words with a steadiness that surprised her, because this was a room she rarely felt safe in. The director rubbed a thumb along the edge of his clipboard and said the old incident would make this hard, and said the word liability like it was a wall, and Kayla felt her throat close and then open again as she told him she had remembered something. He set the clipboard down, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The memory had fallen like a stone into a still pond that morning while the chain rattled, and the ripples had spread through years she never wanted to touch. She told him about the night where blue light had lit cracked plaster and a radio had clicked with code, and a voice had said O's like a prayer and a command, and the way a heavy body had slid between her and a door while glass rained across the floor like ice. She told him about crawling from under a table while a hand that shook guided her, and how a dog had refused to be moved until more lights arrived and more hands lifted a man who did not open his eyes again, and how the world had turned into a corridor of cold air and bright noise that swallowed her name. She told him she had seen numbers stamped on a collar later when someone tried to push the dog toward a van, and how those numbers had matched the file she found with the word refused on the line that counted loyalty as a flaw. When she finished, the room did not change, but something inside the director's posture did, a small drop of the shoulders and a slower blink that felt like belief. He cleared his throat and said he would make a call to a program that placed retired working dogs with handlers who would keep them in structured routines, and he said they would need a home visit and a trainer to sign off before anything left the building. She nodded and thanked him without saying the word thank you, because gratitude had always been a balancing act on a thin beam with a drop below it, and she walked straight to the run where Rex watched her cross the floor without moving a muscle. She pressed her forehead to the bars and felt his breath warm her skin, and she thought about the way some doors close and some doors open, and how sometimes the handle sits in your own hand without you knowing it. The day stretched and bent around them while phones rang and keys clicked and forms printed, and she learned that progress could feel like rain tapping and never quite turning into a storm. Training began 2 days later in a quiet corner yard with cracked asphalt and faded paint, where a retired handler with a worn ball cap taught her how to stand, and where to put her eyes so her body said yes and no in ways a dog could trust. Rex took the work like it was air, and the first hour ended with his mouth soft and his tongue flicking just once, and a look that meant now we are a team, and the trainer nodded in that small way experienced people use when the big words would bruise a fragile thing. They practiced fuss along a fence and sit and down and stand until the leash felt like a string that carried breath instead of a chain that carried fear, and they learned how to build a bubble of space in a crowded walkway so other people would not invite him to fail. Kayla went home after each session with her shoulders loose and her mind quiet for the first time in years, and she slept without shoes on for a week and woke to the slow weight of peace that had not visited her since she was small. The shelter visit for the final evaluation brought all the noise back in one long wave. A stack of metal pans slid and crashed in the prep room, and a chorus of barks surged in panic, and Kayla felt the old heat rise along her spine as every hinge and latch shouted at her nerves. She turned to Rex with the word watch to fix his eyes on her, and the panic bounced off him like rain off stone because his focus left no space for fear. Then she sent him to sit and down and stand and heel in a little dance that turned chaos into pattern. The trainer stood with arms folded and a still face, and the director watched with a pen that did not move, and the staff who had called him the statue did not speak. Rex chose to look to her for the release instead of scanning the door, and she felt the electric splice of trust in the line between them, and in that instant she knew this was already home. They gave her a plain collar with a new tag that carried his name and a rescue number, and the old metal collar with its numbers went into a small cardboard box that smelled like dust and toner and a past that would not be erased but could be honored. Kayla fastened the new collar and felt the warmth of his neck under her fingers, and he leaned his weight into her once in a brief press that read like a signature on a line. The director signed a form and slid it to her and told her to breathe, and even though she had never needed permission for that, she did it anyway because the moment carried that much weight. The trainer scratched his chin and said to keep the work coming and keep the routine straight, and she nodded like she had made a promise to a teacher who would always know when she skipped her practice. She tucked the box under her arm and wrapped the leash around her fist like an oath. The world outside the front door looked new in the way the same street can look new when you are not walking it alone, and the afternoon light painted the cracked sidewalk gold and made the chain link glow like clean wire. She stepped to the threshold and Rex matched her pause and then lifted his eyes and waited for a word that would shape the next hour and the next year, and Kayla felt the old ache in her ribs loosen like a knot that had finally learned how to fall apart. She gave the word heel and moved into the light, while the leash hummed a soft music from ring to hand, and her shadow and his shadow braided and unbraided across the concrete like a long conversation that would never end. A car rolled by with a slow tire hiss, and a kid on a bike laughed down the block, and the air was full of the ordinary sounds that can sound like miracles when you have earned them. They reached the gate, and she set her palm against the cool bar and felt the whole day gather itself like a breath before a long swim. The latch clicked and the gate swung, and a small bark lifted from Rex and rolled out along the street like a bell that calls you home. And she smiled in a way that made her cheeks ache and did not try to stop it because nothing needed control in that instant. The wind moved through the trees and set a handful of leaves spinning across the curb in a little parade that led toward the corner and a patch of sun, and Rex tipped his head to watch them as if someone had cued a line he recognized from a story he had loved and lost and found again. Kayla listened to the rhythm of his pads on the concrete and matched her steps to them until the beat clicked into a steady promise that felt like a road under 2 strong feet and 4 sure paws. The leash settled into her hand with the weight of something real and right, and every breath from his chest answered one from hers in an easy call and response that told her what a team could be. His tail swept once, then again. The gate eased shut behind them with a soft metal sigh, and the sound hung in the air like a note that asks for your answer, while the day opened in front of them with a bright path that did not hide its turns. Would you have trusted that sound and taken the first step with him?
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.